Doom, 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 doom. Doom, 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 doom.
Developer interviews.
Hello, my name is Neil Ticktin. I'm the editor-in-chief and publisher of MacTech magazine.
And I'm Victor Agreda Jr., the editor-in-chief of TUAW.
And we're here this week, and we've been talking with developers about what they think about Apple's announcements at WWDC, what they see coming towards them as the year goes on, some of their favorite features, what it's going to mean to their products, and of course, at the end of the day, what it's going to mean for you, the users, and the developer community in the way you're going to use the apps and use the technology. So what Victor and I thought we would do right now is chat a little bit about what we each liked and what we each saw in there. And I guess let's start off with what I think our favorite features were. What was your favorite feature of what you saw in both OS 10 Mavericks and iOS 7?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm probably buying a new MacBook Air.
Yeah.
The new chips in there are just fantastic.
Not to mention the battery. I mean, the battery
and
alone.
The battery,
is like,
yeah, absolutely.
Like,
I carry around a spare battery with me just for my 11-inch MacBook Air. But that, and I want a Mac Pro.
Yeah.
I think the Mac Pros are just unbelievable.
Right.
Can't wait to see one in person. But so far, what I've seen in Mavericks and iOS is that better integration. So if you get a notification on one, you can dismiss it from the other, which has always been kind of a pain point, especially if you're sitting there and you get that casino effect, where three things go off at once, and then you've got all these messages stacked up on one thing, or if you don't go to your iPad for 3 days, you're like, oh, geez. So that's really cool, and that's the kind of thing that Apple is so good at, is integrating all of that stuff. But
and hopefully we'll see that be even tighter on things like messages, which even notoriously a lot of times right now don't always realize, hey, I'm done notifying you, or you need to delete a message or whatever, it's still in the other places or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, what I'm seeing so far is that messages still kind of gets things out of order once in a while. But I think, again, these are betas at this point.
That's
still.
Okay, my brain's out of order, it works better that way.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot to look at. But it's just so much iteration of improvement in efficiency.
Yeah.
And that just makes everybody better at what they do.
Yeah, yeah. And, there's a lot of little efficiency things. There's the whole full screen mode part of it, where you can have menus on both sides, docks on both sides, full screen mode on both of your main screens of your two screen user. AirPlay devices as being treated as a monitor. I mean, wow, how useful is that going to be for so many people?
I can't wait to use that.
And you can always tell, whether somebody's a developer or a video guy, because the first thing out of their mind when they really love what's going on is, God, that the AirPlay the dual being able to do two full screens with the menus and the whole thing are just awesome to do. So many people, though, and I think we're right in there with it, are just so thrilled with the way Apple is thinking about power usage now at the Mac level, with Mavericks being able to not just have tools to better develop it and to synchronize how the power and wake-ups and interrupts are all used, but to actually analyze that and help the developers understand what they're doing. Really, really pretty phenomenal overall.
Well, and Apple, as primarily a hardware company, it realizes that their battery technology is not progressing as fast as everything else.
Right.
I mean, there's physical constraints around the actual chemistry of that, and that's a really, really tough thing to do. Chemistry is a tough thing to hack,
Right.
And the solution we knew always was going to be better software,
Right.
And it was really phenomenal to see them put that front and center and say, this is our solution. I think it's great.
Yeah, and I think so too. I mean, and it's interesting to see how Apple's also been looking at a lot of the usage and using productivity in the way of, like, for example, the new iCloud keychains and making that work in that way. Now, it's not great for a lot of enterprise kinds of tools. It's not secure enough, I think, for a lot of people. It certainly doesn't handle the multiple roles within an organization. So if you have a network administrator who's got a password, you want their manager or other team members to have certain passwords, it's not going to handle that. So there's a great opportunity for folks like 1Password or LastPass or any of these other services that are out there still to do their thing, and that's pretty cool to see. But there's other things in there. I mean, how many of us have sent ourselves a link to a Google Map on our phone, or it just to be able to have maps on OS 10 and send that immediately to the phone and just have it be transparent. There's so many of these. God, why didn't they do this before? Kind of thing.
Yeah, and fully utilizing the data detection, because now you see. In the calendar, you can see map directions, or you can click and you can go to maps and you can see that. So all of these things are just becoming so much more tightly integrated.
Right, and then stuff that it's amazing how many people didn't realize that iBooks was not available on the Mac. You know, and it's been that way for quite some time.
That's something that we've talked about a lot, and Erica Sadun actually used to always bring it up. It's like, why isn't iBooks on the Mac?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't read books on my Mac, but honestly, it is handy. I mean, it's one of those things that's nice to have. It's not a critical thing, and the fact that people didn't even realize it was there kind of tells you how non-critical it was.
Well,
but
I think
it's really cool.
I think what we're going to find is that a lot of people, especially on like a MacBook Air or some type of a portable device, are going to end up using iBooks much of the way that they do necessarily an iPad. And maybe not so much on the desktop in some ways, but still I think that it gives them the ability to do that or to read a little bit and of course hopefully mark their place and have it transpose into the right place on it the way it does on other devices, which is pretty cool. So, and then there's all these other things, whether it's auto update on the Mac App Store or auto update on the iTunes App Store. Those were all really good things to have happen because it's so annoying to not have your app updated on, to see that many apps happen all the time. Now there are some developers that are not so happy about that, and not being able to kind of control that experience. And there's going to be some users that are not that way. So it's going to be interesting to see, how much of what Apple does, and maybe they put some of that into the control of developers or folks overall.
Well, I'm hoping that you can turn off the auto updates, which you've traditionally been able to turn that off in any application.
Right.
And I do hope that because there are those instances where something happens and you either want a previous version or you don't want to upgrade yet. There's something in there that you don't want.
Or even more than that, a lot of people, if they're out being mobile and they're on a USB modem, they don't want to use up the data to do something like that. They want to wait until they're in that environment. Now, Apple's not usually been a company that has a lot of preferences, so it's going to be interesting to see is this something that they look to do in some form or another. iTunes Radio was pretty cool.
There were so many things that I keep forgetting that is actually probably going to be the biggest thing for the average user out there because everybody loves music.
Right.
And Apple transformed the industry by making the iPod and getting people to listen to music on the go and mobile again. And that really, I've spoken to so many artists that have said the iPod was such a pivotal thing.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think about it, as I think you were saying here, is that Apple has been at the forefront of making music more available, more playable, more enjoyable in a lot of ways, more accessible. And iTunes Radio here is going to be another big jump in that way. And there's a lot of people going, well, what about Pandora? What about this or that or whatever? And I think what we're going to see is a lot of these developers who have things that sort of compete with iTunes Radio or sort of overlap with it. Hopefully, we'll see Apple basically doing the proof of concept, making then what these third-party developers can do that much more interesting to folks. That the more features they put in, things that people want that maybe Apple didn't address, it'll allow them to serve a community that will be a much larger community than before. So that's pretty cool to see what's going on. Now it's there's a lot of things here that they've done for developers. The API list is huge that they're going to be releasing. There's a lot of tools that we're going to make it easier for developers to focus on what they do best, as opposed to what developers are constantly always kind of having to overcome. So things like sprites and making that more accessible to folks and having it so that people can focus again on whatever it is they're doing on the back end is really, really neat to see.
Yeah, as people are going through sessions, I'm seeing tweets despite NDA and whatnot. But of course, some of these things taken out of context mean nothing to average people. But I'm seeing things that Apple's implementing, and if you go back and you look at when the App Store first opened, because I tinkered around a little bit, and if you look at just at playing a sound, originally you had to drop down to C to do that in the very beginning, and now you go all the way up to where audio control is now, and it's just unbelievable.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so powerful and yet so easy to use as well.
Yeah.
So that continual process of development has been amazing, and they keep throwing these great tools at developers, and they're only going to make better stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think we saw not just like what's going to come at us for the course of this year, but also what's going to come at us even a little bit further into the future on stuff. And we had the announcement of some of the car stuff that was going on, and that was really neat to see.
The car stuff is going to be huge, and that's going to be a slow burn because manufacturers have to implement that. And we also still don't know, I think you and I were talking about this earlier, we really don't know how open that's going to be to third-party developers.
Yeah.
Right? So is this going to be a Apple-only pie for a while? I suspect that it probably will be, and this is Apple's way, right? Is that here's our thing, and we're going to do it. We're going to kind of show the way, and then we're going to open it up and see where you guys take it.
It was interesting because at CES earlier this year, I was trying to look forward a little bit. I was doing a keynote for the MacTech track
Mm-hmm.
that was at CES and the Apple track that was at CES, and I was trying to look forward to see, where else do we think that the platform is going? And it's pretty clear that there's some stuff in the home. Apple TV ultimately someday will actually come in some way beyond where it's at right now. But it occurred to me that the place where people spend the most time that isn't addressed by their phone or by their desktop, or their laptop machine, or the home, or in front of the TV and whatnot, is the car. And so this is what I've been hoping to see and expecting to see. And what I think we saw from Apple is that they're going to say, okay, you know what? When you're in the car, we're going to allow the car talk to the car, from the phone. We're going to basically make the car an I/O device in a lot of ways. And we're going to make that fairly simple so that many different manufacturers can go ahead and do it. And I think in the beginning it's going to be a very controlled experience, like you said, and that ultimately maybe we'll see them open up both on the Apple TV side and also on the car side, because there's a lot of opportunity for developers in both of those scenarios, and it'll be really cool to see.
Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know, between that and that Mac Pro was just astounding. I mean, just for those people that didn't see what that looked like in here, it's like this big.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tiny, and it is just packed. And on one hand, in the most positive way, it kind of reminds me of the Cube of years ago, where there was so much computer in such a small amount of space and whatnot. And this is this beautiful cylinder that clearly is functional, where you can grab in where the handle is at the top, and really kind of, it's just a machine that everybody wants, even if they don't need it.
Yeah.
And so phenomenal piece of engineering. These guys can be really super proud of themselves overall.
Yeah.
So, what else did you see?
It's not so much. There was a thing on the slide that I think speaks to something that's interesting. Of course, we talked about the Sprite Kit,
Right.
and that's something to help address the fact that there's a lot of third-party tools for game design and development. And that stems from, of course, Apple has never really been fully on board with games.
Yeah.
They paid a little bit of lip service to it here and there. But the game controller APIs to me are very, very interesting. And, and you've been in this long enough to know that sometimes some of the APIs that we see are perhaps indicators of hardware yet to come.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to me, all of the mobile, the things about battery and efficiency and all that. But then this game controller thing, this is a proper API for game controllers, and you wonder, well, why didn't they do that before? And I have to think that there is something maybe we don't know about yet that could be, because right now, if you want to play games on Apple TV, you can do that.
Yeah.
If you have a dedicated, but you have to have another, $300-$400 piece of equipment.
Right.
Okay. Apple TV is $100. So there's this.
So when the accessory is 4 times the cost of the device.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if you've got something that's like a iPod Nano, or so there's possibly some really, really cool stuff that we don't even know about yet that they're getting people ready for.
Which I think is quite cool, and I think that the more they give to game developers, and game developers are some of the most creative people out there. The more they give game developers to kind of get out of the way of the creative experience and make some of the nuts and bolts stuff work for them, the better off they are. And games that are getting that much better, the control panel getting that much better.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because we talked about some of the access that Apple's giving to like the flashlight and whatnot. We were talking with one developer who is the developer of the most successful flashlight in it all, and he's a little bit. I think there's a little bit of concern there, but at the end of the day, they started to realize how limited Apple's flashlight is, and some of the ways of doing it, that they've done a better job. They know more about doing the flashlight than Apple does, and so they're looking forward to people understanding there can be a flashlight, and how that'll ultimately turn into revenue for them, and that was good to see. A lot of these. One of the lessons of years past, there's this term in our industry, have been Sherlocked.
Right.
And what that refers to is when Sherlock first came out, it competed with a search tool from Cariella Software, and the developer looked at that and said, you know what, I'm just going to back off, and Apple did it, and then basically Apple killed his product essentially by that announcement. And the developers this time around have, instead of getting Sherlocked in that way, have looked at it as almost a challenge for them to step up their game, to do the things that they do best, that they know best, and to actually let Apple do the proof of concept of what that technology should be, and then go and do it even better than Apple's doing it.
Well, you look at every iOS device ever made has always come with an email application,
Right.
from the very first iPhone
Right.
to today.
Right.
But there is no shortage of email applications out there,
Right.
and each one does email in a different way,
Right.
and many of them have been incredibly successful and incredibly popular.
Right.
So there's always some way, and of course Apple, is going for now, especially with the amount of iOS devices out there, is going for a very broad audience.
Right.
It's not like the 90s where it's like, okay, graphic designers and video editors, we love you. This is this huge broad audience. There's always going to be edge cases, and there's always going to be, I think, a model for people, especially with the low cost of distribution.
Yeah.
Right? You can hit these people if you can make your money off of 1,000 users.
Great.
You can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that makes some sense to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, a lot of the stuff is supposed to be coming out in the fall, and it'll be just, I don't know, a matter of weeks or even just a couple of months really before MacTech conference this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking forward to what the developers of MacTech conference have done. I'm looking forward to how the IT folks have figured out how to deal with managing and deploying this stuff. It's going to be quite the challenge. And it's, from the conference organizer point of view, I think we probably have to thank Apple for giving us such
Sure.
a rich amount of content that absolutely must be covered, in that event.
Well, there's there's some good there's some business and enterprise stuff that we've seen that they've done where it's like, oh, great, that's
yeah.
excellent,
Yeah.
right? But then there's some things like you said, like iCloud keychain,
Yeah.
where it's kind of like,
Yeah.
that's not gonna work. Yeah,
Great consumer, not so great on the enterprise
exactly.
side.
Yeah, so we'll
But,
see that.
but we saw a number of developers today who talked about, hey, we're going to go ahead and compensate for that. And we're going to
Yep.
handle Apple stuff in this way, and we're going to see more and more of that as the year goes on.
Absolutely.
So wow, looks like a really, really cool year that we're going to be moving forward here. I think that we're going to see just a tremendous amount of really neat stuff coming down the
jam-packed.
pipe. Jam-packed with features, with OS releases, with new product announcements. I mean, we didn't even hear about a whole bunch of other stuff because it's not the right place necessarily this year. So I think we're in for a very, very busy second half of 2013. It's going to be really quite phenomenal to watch. So, anything else you can think of?
My brain's still wrapping around all this stuff.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding. So, I'm Neil Ticktin. I'm the editor-in-chief of MacTech Magazine.
And I'm Victor Agreda, the editor-in-chief of TUAW.
And we look forward to talking to you more in future interviews. And we hope you'll take a look at all the developer interviews and what they had to say, what they're seeing, what their favorite features were, and where they're going to be going with their products and how it's going to affect you. Thank you for watching.